A Build Hatch developed production.
Hello, I'm Aaron Kyle and welcome to another episode of Build Hatch. On this week's episode of Build Hatch, I had the opportunity to sit down with the very interesting founder of Archclad Australia, Karl Brown. Archclad is one of Australia's premier architectural cladding providers, and I'm a big fan of their work. Every week I am fascinated by the stories behind people and the work in construction, and this week is such an interesting chat with Karl. Karl is a very deep thinker, and you'll be amazed on how his ideas, his inspirations, and even answers to complicated problems can come from, well, just thinking, or sitting in traffic, or thinking about his earlier days in the military and how armour on army tanks are impacted by heat. This is the kind of deep thinking I'm talking about. It's just amazing, and like I said, these stories and people like Karl, they are just fascinating people, and I love it. So let's get into it. Karl Brown from Archclad in Melbourne, welcome to Build Hatch.
Hi, great. Thanks to be here.
That's okay. Now, full disclosure, now I'm actually interested in your product. Before we go back in time and hear about where you grew up and how you got into your business, can you tell us a little bit about Archclad?
Yes, Archclad is a cladding company specialised in cladding. We don't do cladding as a sideline like a lot of other companies where, they mainly make flashings or other products, and cladding is just on the side and not as much of a focus as with us. We eat, live and sleep cladding. That is us. It's our life. So based on that, we've spent a lot of time going back into making sure that what we supply is something that we can live with and sleep well at night. It's not going to blow off the building, it's not going to leak, and it's not going to corrode.
Or catch fire.
Yes.
Which is a hot topic
Correct.
At the moment.
Yes, so with the fire testing, even before the cross fire and the fire in Docklands, about 2 years before that, we decided that aluminium, which was one of our major products, may have a flaw in combustibility. So we decided to embark on testing that. And the main reason I wanted to test that was to do with the 9/11 bombings and the fact that those buildings failed with a lot of molten aluminium on them through the fires and the actual molten aluminium from the aircraft, leading to catastrophic failures of those buildings. So that was one thing. The other thing was I'm an avid historian and spent a bit of time in the South African Navy when I did my national service and followed the Falklands War. And we had destroyers made up out of aluminium superstructures that when they were hit by Exocet missiles, burnt down to the waterline. So I needed to understand what and how aluminium works as far as fire goes. So we employed Olsen's fire engineers at the time. They've changed their names now, but they did a large assessment of all our aluminiums and all the testings, and we did the 1530 Part 3 testing on it, and then they assessed all of the information and came out that the aluminium is a great product and meets the CP4 in the old BCA, which is now the C1.9 EV, which is deemed to comply as a non-combustible product in the latest BCA.
It's such a complicated and technical product dealing with cladding nowadays, and you obviously have a genuine interest and passion in it. What about growing up? I'm picking up on a slight accent there. What was your childhood like? Like, sort of take us through how you got into your sort of career.
Yeah, I was born and bred in Pretoria in South Africa. Grew up there in a family of three. In those days, we didn't have TV, we didn't have computers, we didn't have anything that turned on and off. If you wanted to make something, you went and found a way to make it and be innovative.
Very tough upbringing.
Yeah, tough, but I think fair and good. We got our pocket money. We used to go to the hardware store and look through the specials bin and find out what we could make out of it. And that's basically, I think, what's led to our innovativeness in later life.
And what sort of student were you at school, or like, did you know what you wanted to do when you sort of grew up?
No, not really. My father was an entomologist, so I grew up traipsing around the South African veld looking for grasshoppers and butterflies and insects. Only when I finished my national service, did a friend's father of mine, who was a managing director of Baldwin Steel, say, "What you going to do?" So I said, "Well, I'm not quite sure. I might actually take on and join the Navy for another couple of years until I make my mind." He said, "No, you're not. You come and work for me." And I went and did a trainee course with him through Stewart's and Lloyd's, who was the umbrella company. And that was in every aspect of steel making, marketing, and a great grounding to any youngster.
So I guess that was your path into steel and manufacturing and that industrial side of construction, really?
Correct. I'd say one of the first exercises I got given with them was to take over a new contract that they just got for supplying flat sheet to Steelmobile, which punched out the body parts for Mercedes, BMW, and later Volkswagen and Toyota in South Africa to work out the best economical size of coil to actually supply to the machinery and the punching. So we did a lot of that blanking, and then I was keen on windsurfing and ended up on a weekend down in Durban where I wrecked my car. And because they had a branch there and were looking at transferring a new machine there, I got seconded to installing the machine, commissioning it, and working it. And that was a slitting line for flat sheets for Toyota and pressing body parts for Toyota.
You never know where life takes you, do you?
Absolutely. I was just reading that poem about, the path less traveled last night, and it's true, You always do try and take a path when you come to a fork, and when you look back, hopefully it was the right path.
That's right. That's life at its finest, isn't it? You never know where it heads in what direction, and it's always swings and roundabouts, isn't it?
Absolutely.
Okay, so that's sort of your background in that core manufacturing and fabrication environment and things like that. You obviously have a bit of insight and interest in, you mentioned before about military or Navy equipment and heavy vehicles and stuff like that. So how did that sort of come into the mix?
Well, in South Africa, we all had to do national service. So 2 years was the minimum you had to do, and then you had a commitment of doing camps after that. So I ended up doing my national service in the Navy. Saldanha was where we did our 3-month training. I then went to Simonstown, and then due to the fact that I play bagpipes, I ended up in tattoos and pipe bands and things all over the country, and ended up doing my camps for our 3-month per year commitment after our national service in Richards Bay, where I was a coxswain, and my love of water and water sports certainly came into it as well.
And what about sort of coming to Australia? How did that sort of transpire?
Well, things weren't going too well in South Africa. We all had great hopes for the future there with Mandela, and unfortunately 27 years later it's really gone to the dogs. So we did the right thing. We came over 21 years ago. We did the right thing for the kids. My son was 9 years old. The 2 girls were a little bit older, and they all here in Australia now. We're all Australian citizens and proud to be. And that's basically how we ended up here in Australia.
And what did you do for a job? Because that would have been so challenging coming over here.
Yes.
Did you have any friends or networks or anything?
No, we planned it quite well in the fact that we ended up with a very large roofing company in South Africa after, the steel side of it, called Brown Deck Roofing, hence the name Karl Brown, Brown Deck. And we ended up with a very large project, which we sold the company with the project and took the profit out of that project to actually come over here. We then I joined a existing roofing company over here and did many large projects over here before we specialised and went off into the cladding field.
I suppose looking back, is there vast differences between, say, the roofing systems that us Aussies are used to doing compared to back in South Africa, or is it fairly similar foundations?
Look, fairly similar. I'd say the world leaders back in the day was actually New Zealand. New Zealand had brown-built metal sections, and a lot of the profiles and materials that we use nowadays all originated in New Zealand, which is quite bizarre because it is small, and the fact that they were so good at their engineering and their roofing bears testament to the products, because they're still all being used today. You know, brown-built long line 305, all of those are the old brown built profiles. There have been many modifications since then. There was Diamond Deck, which was also part of the brown built, which is very similar, and that's where we designed our clip tray 48 around. A lot of the thoughts and the original ideas of that stem back to us using Diamond Deck back in South Africa.
I suppose, like, for people listening to this, I mean, you talked about these systems that you'd been a part of manufacturing and designing. How does one come up with those systems, and like, how do you do it? I mean, it's easy to say. I'm sure you're going to say you just go and do it, but you've got this idea of doing things a bit better and different in terms of metal roofing and the systems that go along with it. So what's the process like to do that?
I think the main thing is confidence. You've got to be confident in yourself and confident in the people who work with you that they can produce the goods.
Yeah, look, I couldn't agree more, but behind the scenes, I know it sounds simple, but it's actually really complicated. That it takes time, and it takes money and investment and energy and stress, like all these different things. Now, I have a feeling, coming from South Africa, you're obviously going through that difficult period way back when, which everyone, you know, has some understanding of. But
I suppose we never really had a safety net in South Africa. If you didn't work hard, there was no unemployment, there was no benefits, there was nothing like that. You had to make it yourself, and you know, life has its cycles in that. You know, you might come from wealthy parents, and you don't then feel that you have to work all that hard. But when you don't have much as a youngster, it becomes a life challenge to actually improve on life and try and do better, and in effect bring back what you never really had, and try and impress your parents as well.
yeah, look, I think that's a large part of it too. And, you know, I was talking to a wonderful person last night on this podcast, and we were talking about those exact same fundamentals of growing up firsthand, seeing what your parents and fellow siblings were exposed to or experienced to or were forced to see, and you know, seeing their mum or dad come home from one job, get changed, have dinner, then go out to the second job. What that does to you as a child growing up, it makes you appreciate hard work and family values, and just like you said, there is no safety net. If you want to go out and get something, well, the world's your oyster. There's an opportunity out there to just go and do it and have a go.
Absolutely. And I found in Australia, as a foreigner, it's actually quite, it's easier in a way to come up with these new ideas and be more successful at it, because I think a lot of Australians do doubt themselves, and it's wrong. You know, we've got a fantastic country over here with extremely strong people, and you just have to go out sites and see what the trades are actually doing and individually what they can do. And if they can believe in themselves, the world's their oyster. It really is. And Australia is a fantastic place in that you can make anything happen.
I 100% agree, and it's, you know, I say it every week, but it's inspiring getting around, talking to people, and behind the scenes, there's so many different people and personalities, from the guy that comes up with, you know, yourself, a leading architectural roofing cladding product, to the subby that's actually putting it into the roof or the wall. There's so many inspiring people out there. Now, what about Archclad? Like, going back, I guess, once you'd sort of come up with these better systems and better products and better processes, how did you start getting it from concept to being manufactured or imported and getting it out to the troops on the ground?
Well, a lot of it was around VM Zinc and their entry into the Australian market. They needed people to roll form their products. They had certain ways of doing it, which we didn't really agree with everything, but on a whole, 99% of what they did was very good, and they had really good guidelines and support. And we were sort of one of three VM Zinc installers and manufacturers in Victoria. We're the last remaining of those three. But as time changed and progressed, we noticed flaws with products, and certain things didn't work well in certain applications. And Zinc's a fantastic product, don't get me wrong, in the right application. It certainly needs oxygen and water to work. And as soon as you have it on a soffit or an unwashed surface, and that's very close to the coast usually, it doesn't work as well and does get white stains in it. That being the case, we started looking at aluminiums and other products that we could supplement into this, that we could use in conjunction with the zinc, so we could still put the zinc on the walls and put aluminium on the soffits and unwashed surfaces. Due to price as well, it was a bit cheaper, and that sort of drove our market from being predominantly titanium zinc through to aluminium. So probably 80 to 90% of our turnover turned to aluminium. And then, as always happens, people try and copy you and want cheaper and cheaper, and people were starting to produce the same profiles in Colourbond. Now again, Colourbond's a fantastic product, and it has got certain limitations right on the beach. They do have some coatings there which are designed for coastal conditions. So as long as those are signed off, they're good for that. But the aluminium is used predominantly around the world for coastal conditions. And the 5000 series, which is the best protection you'll get in alloy against corrosion, is the one that we use. We don't use anything like the 3000 or anything like that. Extrusions, usually I think that's the 2000 or the 3000 alloy. They tend,
so that's sort of the 2000 and the 3000 series. That's a sort of rating system.
Yeah, it's more structural, but not all that good at corrosion.
So the higher rating you have, the better structural properties that it has.
Correct. So the 5000 is basically the best you'll get for corrosion qualities. So any tanks or any aluminium structure built in extreme marine conditions will be probably a 5052 or something like that.
Yeah, right.
And that'll give you many, many years of corrosion-free use.
What about people listening to this who don't understand, or they're interested in knowing the differences between Colourbond and aluminium? What are the main differences?
Well, it's basically the base. So the main thing is, you've got a steel substrate versus a aluminium substrate. Now, aluminium is slightly softer than steel, so you would have to increase the gauge to give you a similar performance. So steel being more rigid. If you were using commercial quality steel, say in 0.55, which the Colourbond commercial quality comes in, you'd be wanting to look at least a 0.8 or 0.9 aluminium to give you the same structural strength.
These are the thicknesses.
That's right, the base metal thickness. And
that's why with the coastal environment, when you're putting on aluminium cladding or aluminium roofing versus Colourbond, once you penetrate the Colourbond, you're, I guess, penetrating the protection or the surface coating, and that's where you end up with rusting and corrosion. Whereas aluminium, basically, its bones are aluminium to the core.
Correct, yes. So the aluminium core won't corrode as such, whereas the fixing driving through the actual steel will basically melt a little bit of the the zinc coating, and you may get a small amount of corrosion starting over there. The neo washer, if you're using a pierce fix type of cladding such as trim deck or corrugated, will actually offer protection against that for a number of years. So you probably wouldn't have corrosion being noticeable for a good 8 or 10 years, but then it would be probably quite bad that the cladding would need replacing.
Yeah, speed up and deteriorate. All right, Karl. So I always love coming into workspaces or workshops or office environments, and always pick up on the little things. And when I walked in here, one of the first things that I noticed was, as you walk into the foyer, there's a Henry Ford quote up on the wall, and it says, "Quality means doing everything right when no one else is looking." And I love that quote, and it obviously means something to you and your culture of Archclad. So tell me a bit about the story with that.
Yeah, well, that's actually from my son. My son was working here as a project manager for 10 years, and it is very true of what we do. We do and are extremely particular about our quality. Every time we walk out the factory, we don't just have one or two quality controllers out there. Everybody's a quality controller, and everybody has to pick up if something's possibly bent at 92 degrees instead of 90 degrees, or something might have a slight dent or kink in it or something like that. That's certainly not to go out to site. We also, if we do any national deliveries, we tend to roll one or two of the longest panels free of charge and put it into the box to make sure that if there are any damages, we don't have a problem later down the track.
Yeah, that's a very good point. And that's not complicated. That's just going back to simple fundamentals of, once things leave the door, it represents our brand, it represents our culture, our business. So it needs to be right.
Correct. Yes, and we actually have one person almost dedicated. He's a driver of ours, and he makes plywood boxes for our deliveries.
Oh, for protection.
Absolutely. So that's sort of built on a pallet. It's got plywood all the way around it. We pack the panels carefully into that, usually in a vertical application similar to glass, so they don't damage.
Oh yeah, they don't fold.
Correct. We put polystyrene in between them, and we then seal it up completely, and that then gets forklifted onto the truck when it comes to fetch it. And they travel really well like that, but there's always a chance that something can, especially lower panels down at the bottom of a pallet, if they are horizontal, that with a hard bump or knock can get a dent. So having a couple of spares is not a bad idea.
Archclad, I feel like we haven't given it justice yet, but Archclad's a leading architectural cladding brand in Australia. Like, you guys are doing some incredible projects. Like, we're talking some pretty sophisticated and challenging and landmark projects. So tell us a few projects that Archclad has been featured on.
Okay, well, one tends to lose count of them because we probably supply or, are involved in anything up to a couple of 100 projects per year. So, we're well into the, over 1,000 projects. And some of them, as you say, are massive projects. I mean, the MCG was a fantastic job. We got involved at quite an early stage there with the roofing package. We turned it around. It was supposed to be horizontal cladding. We turned it around to running down the slope. A lot of that had to be built on the ground, and a lot of people won't appreciate that until you sort of understand it. But all of those modules were built on the ground, clad on the ground, soffits were installed on the grounds, all the flashings were installed on the grounds, and it was then craned up and put into place. I remember having many days of soul searching on how we were going to work a flexible flashing on the MCG to allow for air to blow through the building without causing a buildup of pressure. And basically the whole building is suspended on very large cables, and the cables are probably as thick as your thigh, steel cables. So they anchored around the back, and they cantilever around a couple of outriggers, and they support the main rafters.
So technically speaking, we're not talking about a solid structure that you can just put cladding onto or a roof and it's fixed. And like we're talking about a building or a structure that's moving.
Correct. So it's very much affected by wind. So it's actually a cantilevered structure which is basically carried by these large steel cables. That's why you don't have any posts in the way when you sit and watch the footy, because it wouldn't be very nice. It's always my luck when I go and to the circus as a kid was to sit behind a pole.
You got the pole.
So, so what they did is after they had all this in place, they actually filled those big rafters with concrete, and that actually dropped the pitch of them by about 2 or 3 degrees to give it stability as well. And then the roofing sections and the lighting wells, which were all bolted in there, and the glass sections, which again were bolted onto these rafters, then gave the actual roof and roof cover. But getting back to these flexible flashings, I was sitting in the car one afternoon driving back from the MCG, and a big old truck pulled up next to me, and it had these brushes attached to the mud guards to stop stones getting flicked out. And I thought, there we have it. There's
a solution.
So I found out where to get this from, and we ended up installing about 4,000 meters of this brush all the way around our roof panels. Yes, so the brushes were basically installed to the flashings to allow the wind to exhaust through the flashings, so the brush would lift up, allow the air through, and when there wasn't the air pressure, they'd drop back into place. And when you look up sitting at the footy, you'll just see a fine black line all the way around these installations, but that is actually a brush.
That's amazing. You obviously, I mean, you don't have a PhD in aeronautical engineering or anything like that. I mean, you're sitting in the car wondering, how am I going to solve this? And there in front of you is a truck with a solution for a massive problem to an incredible, one of Australia's landmark sporting facilities. So it's pretty impressive. What was the key moment when you got traction? Once you brought these products into the marketplace, like was there a key project way back before the MCG that sort of gave you that next step?
We had done some very long length roof sheets. In South Africa, we did the Gateway, we sold the company we had there with the Gateway Shopping Centre, and some of the roof sheets that were installed on the Gateway Shopping Centre were 150 metres in length. That long length way of cladding buildings, we basically employed over here in Australia as well with fielders. And my wife, who'd managed Brown-built metal sections in South Africa, actually managed their specialised cladding division for many years and got long length sheets to be recognised where you roll form sheets on site instead of transporting long sheets and cutting down on laps, because every lap is a potential leak. So if you could have a sheet of 40 or 50 meters long, opposed to having 3 joints, being the ridge and 2 expansion joints, there's less chance of leaks. And let's face it, when you're building a warehouse of 10 or 20 or 30,000 square meters, you don't want penetrations, and that's why they were using the concealed fixed type roofing. But to do away with the expansion laps did away with further chance of leaks.
It's obviously an essential element of building, making sure that there are no leaks, and obviously the longer the sheets are, or the longer or wider the cladding panels are, the less joints you have, therefore the less likelihood of water or vermin to get in. So yeah, a way of, I guess, standing yourself out amongst other competitors, having that ability and facility to be able to manufacture larger panels or larger sheets.
Yeah, that's right. And like anything, the unknown is always scary, and people don't want to sort of embrace it easily. But once you've done it, like anything, it becomes easier. The more you do, the easier it becomes.
Yeah, look, it's an incredible outlook, but it's a credit to you, because I know what that's like. When you're trying to do different things, and like always, when you're trying to bring a new product online or a new method or a new methodology, trying to do things differently, it's always difficult to get it across the line. And it's obviously part of your character as well, and linking it all together, your upbringing and everything else. So I'd imagine when architects are coming to you and they're not sure about a particular product, you're able to put them at ease and appease them and give them confidence because you know and understand your product. And I think that's the key to success.
I think the main thing is to recognize the need. Let's face it, what is sales? Sales is satisfying somebody's need. So when an architect comes to you with an idea, you have to hear where they are going and try and understand what their motivation behind what they are achieving is, and then try and see how we can satisfy that need, how we can promote or propose products that will best meet that need and give the same look. It might be another way of doing the system, the zone, the build-up, the substructure, but ultimately giving the same look that the architect is trying to achieve.
That's the important part of making something look like the architect's intentions. What sets you apart is there may be people that are approached and say, look, here's our plans, this is what effect or angle or look that we're trying to achieve with these plans. If you just say, no, we don't have that product or we can't help you, well, there's a lost sale. Whereas your analytical thinking and problem solving and experience, you're able to say, well, hang on a minute, we may not have that, but we've got this, and it can achieve the same look. You don't need to have joins and folds and everything else. Problem solved.
Yeah. Look, I think a lot of people do, again, get back to that whole doubt story, doubting yourself. Be positive. There's always a way around things. There's always a way to do things. And say I can instead of I can't.
Yeah, it's so important. And all right, so Karl, outside of living, eating, breathing, roof products, architectural cladding products, what do you like to do outside of work?
Probably the best is spending time with the family. I think COVID has taught us that we don't have to be married 100% of the time to work. We can actually pull ourselves away from it, and we can spend quality time at home and work from home remotely. I was blessed to be able to stay up at our family home up in the hinterland of Noosa while the COVID was on and work from there in beautiful rainforest surroundings with fantastic views. But that's still, one still has to have a routine, and one still has to make sure that at 8 o'clock in the morning, you turn that computer on and you sit there with your coffee and you work till your 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock, and then maybe go and have a lunch with your good lady, and then basically back to the office to pick up bits and pieces again. So it can be done. And I think it's been, in a way, a good message to all of us that there is life beyond work, and home is very important. And we need to remember to leave work at work and home at home.
Yeah, it's easier said than done, and you definitely have to have that approach that you were just talking about. And I think you're right. And if COVID has taught us anything, it's the importance of that. And it doesn't have to be switching off all day, like you said. It's just more a case of getting what you need to do in the morning done, and just having that hour to reset, be away from work, and then get back into it as well.
I think we have to manage ourselves, and we've got to manage the people that work with us. I've always liked the idea of saying, well, if you're the captain of the ship, there's no point in you being in the engine room stoking the engines, because the ship's going to end up on the rocks. You need to be on the bridge, and you need to be seeing where the ship is going. Yes, there are times when you need to go down and motivate the chap who's putting the coal into the fire, but ultimately you need to guide the ship safely.
Yep, I couldn't agree more. Now, one thing, you guys have got some exciting development and product development going on in the background. So what's on the cards in future for Archclad? What are you sort of working on?
Well, what we are working on, we did a large launch, not probably a year and a half, 2 years ago, of a profile called Clip Tray 48, which we actually designed ourselves and had built in Germany. And we've enjoyed good reception of this profile. It's a standing seam profile. It's 48 millimeter high ribs. and the pan can be varied, but the 275 millimeter is basically our standard for the most economical structural and price-related product.
So this is a roofing product?
So this is roofing and wall cladding.
Oh, and walls.
And the beauty of it is, from an architectural point of view, it throws a deeper shadow line. So the 48 millimeter has a deeper shadow line than, say, the 25 millimeter standing seam, and it gives you a greater variance in reflectivity of a building with shadows and shadow lines. So
just to explain that to people, what we're talking about with shadow lines, this is the, I guess, difference when we're talking about leading architectural products here. What we're talking about is people driving past, walking past, running past. It's about stopping, admiring, looking at that building and the different shadow lines that the sun and the light creates to create these architectural masterpieces, like lines and shadows. And these are the things that...
That's right.
That
Well, the man in the street doesn't actually think about that till he sees it.
Correct.
And
sometimes they don't even know that they can see it. It's just part of the impact of looking at that building
Yes.
and admiring it. An amateur might not be able to notice and think, oh, wow, look at that amazing shadow line. They just see this admired building. But these are the little impacts and statements that give that effect.
Correct, and that's what the architects are after. You know, they after visual texture, if we could put it that way.
It's
and
a great word.
Your textures actually can vary in a day. It's the sun rises in the east and sets in the west, and in that trip across the sky, the shadows cast on a building differ as well. So lighter colors become darker colors, and darker colors become lighter colors just with the shadow moving across it. And with the deeper panel, you do tend to have more of a shadow, and it is something that can be played with. Likewise, we have little interribs, which are tiny little pencil ribs that can be introduced into the pan if it's a very wide pan. Let's say it was a 400 or 500 millimeter wide pan. You'd be concerned about the center bellying out and getting oil canning. So what we've done is we've created little pencil lines that can be rolled into that, which are probably 5 millimeters wide, 3 millimeters high, and just give a slight little texture to that pan, but it stops the oil canning that would take place if it wasn't there.
I obviously know what oil canning is, but explain to our listeners who don't, what is oil canning?
Oil canning is the thermal or the visual aspect of the thermal movement of metal. So all metals expand and contract. Different metals have different rates of expansion, like titanium, zinc will expand 2.2 millimeters per meter at 100 degrees. Aluminium will be 2.4 millimeters per meter at 100 degrees. Now that, if that panel is installed vertically, all of that expansion contraction will take place at the bottom. So the top won't move. As that panel inclines and becomes horizontal, the center will stay fixed, and the two outer sides will expand and contract equally at half of that expansion rate. And that's why a number of clips that you use to hold it down have to allow for the free movement of that product underneath it, because if it's pinned down like you would with a normal pierce fix cladding, such as corrugated or trim deck, it would actually billow between the purlins and give you a distortion to the weakest point, which is really the pan of the sheet.
If the sun hits it on the right spot, it can look a little bit distorted.
Yeah, it's like a billowing effect. That's particularly relevant with wider flat panels.
And it's part of the cladding. It's just it's a property that you
it's
accept.
It's not something you're ever going to get rid of, but you can minimize it. So I wrote an article about oil canning and what I call visual distortion in our webpage, and there's a number of factors. It has to do with basically the type of material. The reflectivity of the material is important. If you, say, used a Colourbond matte color compared to a normal Colourbond color, the normal Colourbond color has a shine to it, so more of a sheen will give you worse oil canning. The same profile installed with a matte color or a satin color will have less reflection. Core 10 is a fantastic one to talk about there as well, because Core 10, when it's installed, is extremely shiny, and it's almost like foil, and it shows every distortion, and it looks quite shocking. especially with wide panels of, say, 590 or 600 wide. But then 2 weeks' time, when it starts rusting and building up the patina, it flattens the reflectivity, and all of a sudden, all that distortion's gone.
Yeah, right. These are the properties, and I could talk about it all day and night. I love architectural products and different types of cladding, and these are the things that, if you're involved in building an architectural project, these are all the cool, quirky little conversations and characteristics and things that you can experience, which is, you know, a fabulous part of our industry. So what about just sort of a brief rundown on manufacturing your product? You know, if I could pick an express panel or a standing seam, the product, how does it sort of come into your factory, and then what sort of work is involved to be able to install it on these masterpieces?
From a production point of view, we get most of our material comes in coil form. The only material that comes in flat form is the covered wood grain material that we have a license to produce for covered in Australia. And that comes in flat sheet, 4.5 meters long by 1200 wide. All the other material comes in coil form, usually 1200 wide, except for titanium zinc, which is 1 meter wide.
So this is basically pressed metal that's rolled up in coil form.
Correct. So when it's produced, it's basically flattened to the right tolerance and then rolled up into a coil. Looks like a huge, gigantic roll of toilet paper.
Yeah, right.
Well, from there, once we have an order, we feed the cutting list and blank sizes into a CNC machine, which then levels the material, slits it lengthwise, and then blanks it and cuts it off to the actual size that we need to make the panel. Then we notch the ends, because we don't produce any products, and we don't recommend products to be produced without a stop end, and a stop end is a 90-degree fold to the ends of the panels. That's especially important with the express panel, because that gives you some rigidity across the actual ends of the panel, but it also stops vermin and small birds or insects getting into the building space. Then
now that's important. So anyone listening to this, you're not getting just any old Colourbond panel that's got an open edge where you have to seal up at the end. These things are already folded, ready to go.
Yeah, so we basically fold all of those here. We do recommend that we do it. Some installers prefer to do it on site themselves, but it's a lot better for us to do it in the factory with the proper notched cutouts and a proper pan folder designed for the softer feed materials. Most of the time we try and do it in the factory as a meccano, so it goes out to site, and the panel should not have to be double handled, other than basically take it out of the crate and put it onto the wall. The more you move it, the more chances of damage, the more the chances of somebody denting it or leaving it in an exposed place, and somebody may walk across it and leave a foot mark on it, which sometimes you don't pick up until the plastic is peeled off.
Yeah, which is a real bugger, isn't it?
Exactly.
Yeah, look, I think that's important, and I think that just shows how systematic and how process-driven you've looked into your business, where if I'm a builder, I'm installing on site, I can come to you guys and I can say, I need X amount of lengths, cut at this, and if I spend that time up front measuring it on site, communicate that to you guys, well, it should just be freighted out, delivered to site, and then install it.
Yes, I think the other thing that is also important in planning a job, especially a remote job, is working all the details out right from the word go. You know, there's no point in getting the panels to site and then trying to work out what detail you're going to use, say at the foot, at a window perimeter, or to the actual junction with a roof or behind a gutter. So all of those details need to be worked out 100%, sketched up, everybody's on board, and then when it's made and it comes out to site as an absolute meccano set, it's very easy to install. We can employ draftsmen who can basically CAD draw a project and show where every panel goes. It does make life easier for the installer, but unfortunately it comes at a cost, and people don't like paying costs.
But it's not that complicated, and I think the point is to spend that time up front, know your product, know how it's being installed, how the substrate needs to be, set the job up properly, and that will mean the likelihood of that project being, a complete success.
Managing the installation, there can be ways to make sure that, let's say, there's a corner coming up. How do we go about that corner? We can roll a double female panel or a double male panel to allow one to move concentrically from a corner to an opposite corner and leave the corner panel out as a last panel or a last resort to be measured on site. That gives a lot of flexibility as well, that you don't have to lay just left to right or right to left, but you can lay towards what you think is a potential issue that you've got to sort out. Once you get the cladding to that, you can then make up a custom panel, which we could then fold and freight out to you.
I could talk all day about this, and I love what you guys are doing in the cladding scene, and having that reputation in an industry that is so crucial and critical, particularly at the moment with what's going on with other cladding products. So it's an amazing feat for you guys with providing a leading product around Australia. And Karl Brown from Archclad, I really appreciate you coming on to Build Hatch, and I'm really excited to look at all these new products that are coming onto the marketplace over the next couple of years. Yeah,
well, thanks for your time, and if anybody wants to find out more, visit our webpage.
And Instagram too. I was going to mention that too. For people listening to this who want to reach out, I strongly encourage you to check out these guys and their particularly their Instagram as well. It's full of amazing products and looks absolutely amazing. So,
well, the whole idea there is just to give motivation to people that yes, it can be done, and dreams can be realized, and nothing's too complicated really. Give us a chance, and we'll come up with a way to do it. One other thing I did want to just quickly mention is we have spent a lot of time and effort on testing of late, especially to meet the latest BCA requirements, and that is fire testing, weatherproofing, and structural testing. So any of that, contact us and we can help you with your project.
Yeah, look, on that, it's such a challenging, timely process to go through. So it just shows the amount of effort that you go into in leading to ensure that your product is meeting compliance, because I can assure you from experience with structural engineers, fire consultants, acoustic, thermal consultants, having all of these parties involved in testing and signing off on your product, it's not a cheap exercise, and it takes a lot of time, a lot of effort, and the financial outlay is incredible. But that's the difference between staying ahead of the pack and, like I said, coming in here, you obviously have the fundamentals with ensuring your product is quality leading, but also you're already on the front foot. You meet the evidence of suitability test with these products. So it's a credit to you.
Yeah, thanks. It's been great chatting.
All right. Well, thanks again, Karl. Thanks for coming on to Build Hatch.
More than welcome. Thanks for having me.
Well, that was another Build Hatch episode with Karl Brown from Archclad. Like I said at the start, I'm a massive fan of their range of architectural products and want to extend a special thanks to Karl and the rest of his team. These guys gave me a personal tour of their factory, and I have to say, it's like a production line and one of the cleanest and impressive setups I've seen. As usual, please check out our Instagram page and other socials, including our YouTube channel, where you'll be able to learn more about a guest and the features of the work that we talk about. Have a great week, and you'll hear me again on the airwaves next week. Thanks for listening to another episode of Build Hatch.
You have experienced a Build Hatch developed production.